Mr. Joe Wolverton has been tracking the global gun grabbers' activities for years. He's a correspondent for the New American Magazine, and he's on the telephone right now. Joe, welcome to TruNews.
Thank you, sir. Good morning to you, or good afternoon to you.
Yes, sir. Joe, glad to have you on the program.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yes, sir. To me, this looks like we're at the, I've been watching this for 13, 14 years, and it seems like we are at the greatest level of danger ever that a UN gun control treaty will be enacted. How are you seeing this right now?
Well, I agree with you. First of all, I compliment you on being so foresighted. I started writing about this in 2010 when the Secretary General released a paper regarding the disarmament of civilian population. And I think we are now at the point where if you would have taken this back, and of course, as you said, I've been following this now for 3 years regarding the Arms Trade Treaty and the program of action that it's built on, the UN program of action on small and illicit firearm trade. And I would say that given the events of the past year or so, this thing has accelerated to the point where we're about to crash into a wall, and among the rubble you are going to find the Second Amendment. You mentioned that many people say to you that the Senate would never ratify such a treaty, and I get told that every time I speak on this subject. Someone raises their hand and say, well, the Senate will never ratify it. Well, all I have to say to you, two very important words when it comes to the current political regime, and that is executive order. President Obama will not be bound by the Constitution, the separation of powers, or by the Congress. President Obama has found the perfect storm of tragedy, and believe me, this is a guy who never lets a tragedy go to waste. He has found the perfect storm of tragedy and trajectory, and he fancies himself the king, and he has now issued and will continue to issue executive orders accomplishing everything in the Arms Trade Treaty, just in case the Senate does grow a spine between now and June when it's likely to come up for a vote.
I agree. He will sign the treaty, and then he will proceed to issue executive orders implementing the treaty, and nobody will dare to stop him.
No, and, that's the thing. It's like the thing I go around telling people, and that it bothers me so much, is that our founding fathers never would have stood for this. Look, Lexington and Concord was about, the shot heard round the world did not begin because of a gun grab. It began because of an ammunition grab, because of the building up of a bureaucracy, because of the building up of an unwieldy military industrial complex within the United States. Our founding fathers would have already been dumping tea into the ocean. But as it is, modern Americans, those of us who fancy ourselves as descendants of George Washington and James Madison and Thomas Jefferson, we sit here and allow this to go on. And I'm afraid that in the very near future, there will be many of us who unfortunately will shake our fist at the heaven with one hand and with the other hand give our guns and ammunition to the federal government or to the international government.
One thing that really worries me is that they will engineer crisis between now and the time that the treaty is finalized, and there will be a steady progression of horrifying crisis that will be used by the news media and the Obaministas to push the American people into accepting the terms of this treaty.
Absolutely. I mean, the state-run media is all about being the bullhorn for the gun grab. You go to the Google News site and just put in the word shooting, and over the past month, you will see hundreds of thousands of hits. There are shootings, and of course, you see the boy that was kidnapped in Alabama. What do we hear about the man who kidnapped him? Look, you're crazy to get on a bus and kidnap a kid. You're crazy. That's all. You can't argue that you're not crazy. You're crazy. But now, does the implication that he's crazy because he is a prepper, as they call him, or that he owns weapons, or that he has a bunker. That's the point the media keeps making. Not that the man's crazy, but that the man was an end-of-the-world prepper, and that he was a survivalist, and that he owned weapons, and that he had a bunker. Well, look, none of that, A, is illegal, but they want to make it illegal. So you cannot read the news of the past couple months without realizing that the state-run media is in on it, and they are nothing but a bullhorn for the gun grab. And, you know, the biggest thing, and the thing I wrote about 3 years ago that is coming to pass is, look, they know that without ammunition, your gun is the club. So they are coming for the ammunition. Make no mistake, a central part of this arms trade treaty is setting ceilings on the amount of ammunition that an individual can own.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you for making that point, because that has been my main point for years. They will go after ammo. They'll say, well, you can have a gun, you just won't have any ammo.
Yeah, I mean, that's what Lexington and Concord was fought about. Our founding fathers fired on the British because they were coming for ammo dumps. You know, the British knew as well as we did, as well as the Obama administration and the UN globocrats. They know that without ammunition, a gun is just a club. You know, you take this, I wrote a couple of years ago now, gosh, I guess it's been 3 years, about the development of this laser, this tiny little laser that Department of Homeland Security took possession of back in November 2012 that allows them from 55 yards to see through walls and detect trace amounts of gunpowder. Well, look, if you don't think this will be put into squad cars and put onto drones as soon as those domestic drones are launched, if you don't think they're going to read your house with this tiny little laser and detect the amounts of gunpowder that exceed the ceiling placed by either our own federal government or the UN, then you're not paying attention to the trajectory of history. They are going to use this drone. They did not invent this drone for any other reason but to detect gunpowder inside the homes of American citizens. If that doesn't frighten people listening to this show, then people listening to this show need to turn it off and go do something else, because they don't understand what's happening in the world today.
And the mainstream news media has a steady drumbeat of propaganda that if you own a certain amount of ammo, that automatically makes you a dangerous person.
I'll tell you what, I have a family member of mine that owns more rounds than you can shake a stick at, and never a single one of them been fired at a human being. I'll tell you, what makes you a dangerous person is you're a person who believes that no law applies to you and that you're the king and you can go and do as your will decides, and that you can bypass the Constitution, bypass the civil liberties of Americans, and that you can become the judge, jury, and executioner of everybody's guilt or innocence. That is what makes you a crazy, dangerous person, not owning thousands of rounds of ammunition.
And Mr. Obama, from what we read in the papers, really, he relishes this power to decide who lives and dies.
Look, I wrote an article yesterday for the New American where, on this released White House white paper regarding the legal justification for killing Americans without due process overseas. Look, they mentioned in this, there was a gallows humor of President Obama regarding the flashcards that he looks at every Tuesday morning in their meeting to decide who's going to be killed with the drone next. This is a guy, look.
Joe, he has flashcards with people's names and pictures on them?
Yeah, absolutely. This isn't me saying this. This came out, I guess, last year in the New York Times article where they first talked about these meetings. He gets together with unidentified members of his team, his intelligence team, and they go through flashcards. And on these flashcards, it has names and faces, and they decide who's going to be marked for extrajudicial killing. Now,
is that like that 16-year-old boy from Colorado?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. One of these people was a 16-year-old eating outside with his cousins. This boy never did anything, and this boy was an American citizen, and he was killed, as were every member of his party, all his cousins, all his friends were killed by an American. Do you understand that? There was an American with his hand on the joystick that fired the missile that killed a 16-year-old American just because his dad did something that was despicable.
And because Mr. Obama chose his flashcard that day.
Absolutely. And, when Jay Carney was asked about it yesterday, I guess on Monday, when Jay Carney was the White House press secretary, was asked about it, he said, I don't even know what to say about that. Every case has its own merit, and that'll have to be discussed at a later time. They cannot defend it. They can, in the white paper, they decide to say, hey, an imminent threat is necessary, and then they go on to say that an imminent threat doesn't mean a threat that's imminent. The Justice Department is full of lawyers, and it would take a team of lawyers to decide that the word imminent doesn't mean imminent.
Who wrote that? Bill Clinton?
Yeah, exactly.
Depends what the definition of is.
That's right. And, these people decided that imminent doesn't mean imminent. And John Brennan, defending it, said that, don't worry, I love the rule of law, and we have a process to vet who is targeted for assassination. Well, you know what, Mr. Brennan? We do have a process for vetting, and it's called the Constitution and the Fifth Amendment. And if you're an American citizen, that applies to you. I don't care if your last name is Al-Laki or Abdul Rahman. One of these days, the people being lit up by Hellfire missiles are going to be with the last name Wolverton or Jones or Smith. Will we take any notice when that happens?
At the beginning of 2012, Mr. Obama was given legal authority to send American troops into the homes of American citizens, to drag those citizens out of their homes, put them under military arrest, take them to unknown military prisons, detain them indefinitely without legal counsel. And by the beginning of 2013, he's been given legal authority to murder any American he deems to be an enemy of his regime. And nobody can challenge this man in court. Now, if this isn't a dictatorship, what is your definition of dictatorship?
Look, I've written this 1,000 times over the past couple of years. I've followed NDAA from the very first time it was brought up as the bill in the Congress. The dictators of history wish they had the power that Barack Obama has. You described it perfectly. Barack Obama has all power over life and death in and outside the United States. If you live in the United States, his power comes from the NDAA. If you live outside the United States, his power comes from his drone program. He has placed himself literally, not figuratively, not metaphorically, not exaggeratedly. He has literally, quite literally placed himself as the emperor of the United States with absolute power over life and death. If you do anything that he alone considers to be a potential threat to the United States security, he can, as you said, send the military to drag you out of your home inside the United States, take you to a military prison where you will no doubt be interrogated, and hold you indefinitely without access to an attorney, without due process, and with the habeas corpus once you've been detained. And if you happen to go outside of the United States, do not at all do anything that could be construed as a threat to national security, because you sure as shooting will be lit up with a Hellfire missile, and there will be no charges, there will be no court, and there will be no due process.
There'll just be cinders.
There will just be ashes. There will be ashes. Ask the family of that 16-year-old. We killed his dad, but you know what? As far as I know, biologically speaking, everybody has a mom. Everybody has a grandpa and a grandma. These people still do not have answers why President Obama ordered an American serviceman to assassinate a 16-year-old American boy. They still don't have that answer. You know, it's one thing for the Senate not to know. It's one thing for me not to know. But it's quite another thing for his mother and family not to have an answer from His Royal Highness why he lit up that 16-year-old boy and all his cousins with 2 Hellfire missiles fired from an American Predator drone, and the button was pulled by an American, and an American president ordered that button to be pushed.
Yeah, Joe, last
the country we live in.
Last November, comedian Jamie Foxx referred to Barack Obama as, quote, our Lord and Savior. Then this week, comedian Chris Rock said that Barack Obama is America's father, and that when he speaks, we need to listen. And he said, and when you don't listen, it will come back to bite you. Well, he said in the butt, but I mean, he didn't say butt. But, you know, we got the message. If you don't listen to Papa, it's going to come back to bite you. Okay, Haiti had Papa Doc de Valle. Cuba has Papa Fidel Castro. So now we're being told we have Papa Barack. Of course, I've always called him Mac Daddy, so I guess it's the same thing. Mac Daddy, Papa Barack. I mean, we're being told that he is our Papa, and that we have to listen to him. And if you don't listen to him, it's going to bite you in the butt. What in the world is going on in this country, Joe?
Well, I'll tell you that you can rail about President Obama, and I agree with you 100%, and you testify, and I'll tap my foot about it. But I'll tell you this, it's our fault. It is our fault. Our founding fathers never would have stood for this. But we sit by and we get on Twitter and we say bad things about President Obama, and we write little articles and we shake our fists, but nothing ever gets done. You know, we do live under Obamacare. How many articles did I write about Obamacare being unconstitutional? But you know what? What am I writing about today? The fact that several conservative governors have now flip-flopped and are embracing Obamacare exchanges. They've decided they're a good idea. That's conservative governors. Look,
But Joe, no matter what we do, Joe, no matter what we do as citizens, nothing matters. Nothing counts.
Well,
the regime doesn't care.
Well, it's like I tell everybody, there is something called nullification, and we won't get into the constitutional details of that, but every one of these states can nullify everything President Obama is saying, and then it just comes a game of chicken. Will he send the federal troops in to enforce his will into one of these sovereign states? Well, let's see. But you know what? And there are very few of them that would have any way to defend themselves because we have federalized the militias. There is not a single state in this country who has not had their militia federalized. You can look up case after case in the Supreme Court, and you can look up code regulation after code regulation. These state militias have been federalized. James Madison wrote in Federalist number 45 that if the gathering storm clouds continued to grow dark and if the federal government became all-powerful, that the last check on liberty would be, the last check on tyranny would be the state militias, who would never stand for this sort of tyranny. Well, you know what? Little did Mr. Madison know that we wouldn't have any militia to stand up and defend liberty in the last days, because we don't have them. They have all been federalized. Guess who the head of the militia is? That's right, President Obama. So we have no last defense for liberty. So we have to sit and take it.
Where's
like
this go?
Obedient children.
Where's this going, Joe? Where's it going? I've got like 2 minutes left. Where's it going?
Well, it doesn't take a prophet to tell you where it's going. All you have to do is read history. We know that there have been republics of the past who started off with representative government. Every single one of them ended up a dictatorship. And at the end of the dictatorship, what happened? Anarchy. At the end of anarchy, what happened? Dissolve. You have Rome, you have Greece, you have Holland, you have Venice. All of these used to be grand republics. Many of the Roman one, at least, and Greek outlasted us by years, hundreds of years. And we will walk that same path unless, I will tell you, unless we decide once and for all that enough is enough. We enforce the terms of the Constitution and allow Washington to go back to being the swamp that it used to be. And we all absolutely refuse to heed any of the dictates coming out of Washington. And that we stand up and be the sons of liberty that we once were. And in that day, we will break the cycle of history. But that requires us to ignore Washington and be prepared to defend that decision on the field of battle.
I'll let that be the final word. My guest, Joe Wolverton, the magazine, The New American. You can check it out at thenewamerican.com. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, sir.